On March 13th, 1964, a woman was stabbed to death on a New York City street for 35 minutes straight, and 38 people heard her screaming for her life. Not one of them called the police, and when investigators asked why, the answers they gave were more terrifying than the murder itself. It was a Friday. Not just any Friday, it was Friday the 13th. The streets of Kew Gardens, Queens, were empty and cold at 3 in the morning, the kind of cold that makes you want to walk faster, keep your head down, get inside as quickly as possible. Catherine Susan Genovese had done this walk 100 times before. She parked her red Fiat in the Long Island Railroad Station parking lot, about 100 feet from the back door of her apartment building, and she started walking. She had no reason to think tonight would be any different from every other night she had made that same short walk home. Kitty Genovese was 28 years old. She was the kind of woman people remembered. She had dark eyes, a quick laugh, and a reputation for working harder than anyone else in the room. She had grown up in Brooklyn, the oldest of 5 children in an Italian-American family, and somewhere along the way she had found her place managing a bar called 11th Hour on Jamaica Avenue in Hollis, Queens. She worked double shifts, stayed late, kept the place running, and saved every dollar she could because she had a dream of opening her own Italian restaurant one day. She shared her apartment on Austin Street with her girlfriend, Mary and Zelanko. By every account of the people who knew her, Kitty Genovese was vivid, warm, and full of life. None of that would matter to Winston Mosley. Mosley was 29 years old. He was married. He had children. He held a regular job. He had no prior criminal record. By every outward appearance, he was a completely ordinary man. But on the night of March 13th, 1964, he left his house in South Ozone Park before the sun came up, carrying a hunting knife, and he later told investigators that he had left with one specific purpose in mind. He said he wanted to find a woman and kill her. He drove around Queens in his white Chevrolet Corvair, moving slowly through neighborhoods, watching. He spotted Kitty at a traffic light while she was driving home from work. He followed her. He waited while she parked her car. And then, when she started walking across that dark, quiet parking lot, he got out of his car and he walked toward her. Kitty noticed him. She started moving faster. She turned and walked in the direction of a bar on the street called Bailey's, possibly hoping to reach people, to reach light, to reach safety. Mosley caught up with her near a bookstore on Austin Street and stabbed her twice in the back with his hunting knife. Kitty screamed. She screamed loud enough that lights came on in the apartment building that faced the street. A window opened somewhere above her, and a man's voice shouted down into the darkness, "Leave that girl alone." Mosley looked up at the lit windows. He walked back to his car. He sat inside it for a moment. The lights in the apartments went off one by one. The street went quiet again. Kitty Genovese was not dead. She was bleeding heavily from 2 stab wounds in her back, and she was trying to get herself to safety. She staggered away from Austin Street and made her way around the corner of the building, moving through the cold toward the rear entrance of her apartment complex. She was leaving a trail of blood on the pavement. She was alone. Nobody came down from those apartments. Nobody came out of any of the surrounding buildings. She was making her way toward her own front door when Mosley got out of his car again. He had moved the car around the corner. He had taken the time to find her again. When he saw that she was still alive and trying to crawl to safety, he followed her into the vestibule at the back of the building, into a narrow stairwell that was completely out of sight of Austin Street and out of view of any window in the surrounding buildings. There, in that enclosed space, he stabbed her again. He sexually assaulted her. And he left her there on the floor of that hallway, dying. Kitty Genovese was still breathing when he walked away. She whispered the words, "I am dying, I am dying." It was at this point, after everything that had already happened, that a neighbor named Carl Ross cracked open his apartment door. Ross had heard something. He had opened his door slightly and looked out into the hallway. He later told investigators that he had seen Kitty lying on the floor, wounded and still trying to speak. He closed the door. He called a friend in another part of the city and asked what he should do. The friend told him not to get involved. Ross climbed out of his own window and went to a neighbor's apartment to think about it. Eventually, someone in the building made a phone call to the police. A woman named Sophia Farrar, Kitty's neighbor and friend, did not wait. She ran down the stairs and found Kitty in the hallway and held her in her arms. She told Kitty that help was on the way. Those were the last words Kitty Genovese heard before she lost consciousness. The police arrived at 3:50 in the morning. Kitty Genovese was put into an ambulance. She died on the way to the hospital. She was 28 years old. The investigation moved quickly. 6 days after the murder, Winston Moseley was arrested in the neighborhood of Ozone Park, not for the murder, but for a completely unrelated burglary. A neighbor had seen him removing a television set from a house and had become suspicious. When police stopped him and searched his car, they found the television. They brought him in for questioning. It was during that questioning session when detectives noticed that Moseley was driving a white car that matched descriptions given by witnesses near the Genovese scene that the conversation shifted. Moseley confessed. He confessed to the murder of Kitty Genovese. He confessed to 2 other murders. He confessed to rapes and burglaries across the borough. He showed no remorse. He expressed nothing that resembled regret or guilt. He gave his account of that night the way a person might describe running an errand. His trial began on June 8, 1964. His defense attorneys entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, and Moseley himself took the stand and described in detail what he had done that night. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. On June 11th, they returned a verdict of guilty. On June 15th, Judge J. Erwin Shapiro sentenced Winston Moseley to death. When the sentence was read aloud in the courtroom, spectators cheered. Moseley stood there and showed nothing. The death sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment on appeal. He remained in prison for the rest of his life. He died behind bars on March 28, 2016, at the age of 81. But the murder of Kitty Genovese did not become one of the most talked about cases in American history because of Winston Moseley. It became famous because of what the New York Times reported 2 weeks after her death. On March 27, 1964, reporter Martin Gandberg published a front-page story in the New York Times with a headline that stopped the country cold. The story claimed that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens had watched a killer stalk and stab a woman in 3 separate attacks over the course of more than half an hour, and that not one of them had called the police during the assault. The story spread instantly. It ran in newspapers across the country. It was discussed in living rooms, in churches, in schools, in government offices. How is it possible, people asked, that 38 human beings could hear a woman screaming for her life and do absolutely nothing? What had happened to America? What had happened to basic human decency? The question became so urgent, so deeply disturbing, that it launched an entirely new field of psychological research. 2 social psychologists named John Darley and Bibb Latané became consumed by the question of why the witnesses had not acted, and they conducted a series of experiments that produced one of the most important and counterintuitive findings in the history of psychology. What they discovered was something they called the bystander effect. Their research showed that the more people who are present during an emergency, the less likely any single individual is to intervene. The reason, they found, was a phenomenon called diffusion of responsibility. When a person is alone and witnesses someone in danger, they feel the full weight of that responsibility. When many people are present, each individual unconsciously assumes that someone else will take care of it. Everyone assumes that someone else has already called for help. Everyone waits. And in that collective waiting, the person in danger is left completely alone. The Genovese case became the defining example of this effect. It appeared in psychology textbooks for decades. It was taught in university courses around the world. The phrase Genovese syndrome entered the academic vocabulary. The idea that ordinary, decent people could collectively fail to act in the face of a violent crime became a cornerstone of how researchers understood human social behavior. There was only one problem with the story. Significant parts of it were not true. In the years and decades that followed, journalists, researchers, and Kitty's own brother Bill Genovese dug into the original reporting and found serious inaccuracies. The 38 witnesses had not watched the attack. Most of them had heard something in the darkness and were not certain what it was. Some assumed it was an argument between people who had been drinking. Some heard a single scream and then silence and assumed everything was fine. Because of the layout of the buildings and the position of the attack, very few people had a direct line of sight to what was actually happening on that street. The second and third attacks took place in a rear vestibule that was completely invisible from any apartment window. At least one neighbor had shouted out his window and scared Mosley away temporarily. At least one person had called the police. And Sophia Farrar had run downstairs without hesitation and held Kitty in her arms while she died. In 2016, the New York Times acknowledged that its original reporting had been deeply flawed. The paper stated that the 1964 article had grossly exaggerated both the number of witnesses and what those witnesses had actually perceived. The story that had defined a generation's understanding of human indifference had been built on reporting that did not hold up to scrutiny. But here is the thing that the correction of the record cannot fully erase. Even the more accurate version of events that night is not comforting. Even if the number was not 38, there were people who heard something and went back to sleep. There was a man who saw Kitty lying in a hallway, wounded and trying to speak, and who closed his door and called a friend in another borough to ask what to do. There was a city of people sleeping in their apartments while a 28-year-old woman bled to death in a stairwell 90 feet from her own front door. And the question that the case planted in the American consciousness, the question that it has never fully let go of, is not simply whether those specific neighbors on that specific night made the right choices. The question is what each of us would do. The question is whether, in the dark, in the confusion, in the comfort of assuming someone else will handle it, we would be any different. Kitty Genovese wanted to open an Italian restaurant. She worked double shifts and saved her money and shared her apartment with the person she loved. She walked home the same way every night. On the morning of March 13, 1964, she was 28 years old and she was trying to get to her front door. She never made it. Kitty Genovese's murder did not just change the city of New York. It changed the way human beings understand each other. The research it inspired has saved lives, has trained first responders, has reshaped how we teach people to act in emergencies. There is a reason that in every safety training course today, instructors tell you to point at one specific person and say, "You, call 911, not just call out to a crowd and hope someone does it." That instruction exists because of what happened to Kitty. Her death was not meaningless, but she deserved to live. She deserved to open her restaurant. She deserved to make it through that parking lot and up the stairs and through her own front door. And she deserved a world in which the people who heard her screaming would not go back to bed. If this story stayed with you, that feeling you have right now is exactly why these cases need to be told. Every one of these women had a name, a life, a future that was taken from her. If you want to make sure their stories are never forgotten, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. We cover real cases, real victims, and the real systems and human failures that allowed these crimes to happen. Leave a comment below and tell us which case you want us to cover next. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember the name Kitty Genovese, because the world forgot her once already, and she deserves better than that.